Necessary to Destroy Media Narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. in a very dark, bleak, grim, dismal, freezing cold evening in Budapest, where nobody has seen the sun for several weeks now. I mean, it's like nobody even believes that there is such a thing as the sun, because every day is shrouded in a patina of grayness and misery. However, on an optimistic note, thank you everybody who has joined me for the Tuesday live stream. Much appreciated. And of course, the topic of the hour is the Donald Trump's ascension to the presidency, his return to the presidency. But before I talk about that, it's very interesting. Just I'll do a quick before I forget, a quick summary of the events in the UK over the last couple of days, where this 18-year-old young man who murdered 3 little children in Southport near Manchester back last summer has pleaded guilty, and the government has essentially admitted that he counts as a terrorist, that he was influenced by Islamic terrorism online, and clearly he was inspired by Islamism when he committed these horrific murders. Now, if you recall what he did, he went into this dance class with these very little children, attacked them with a knife. 3 of these little girls were killed. A number of the children were very seriously injured. And what then happened was riots broke out across northern London. No, sorry, not London, northern England. There was a great deal of dissatisfaction and unhappiness, and some people evidently thought that, this was that the killer was an illegal immigrant. And Prime Minister Keir Starmer went up there, spent about 10 seconds laying a wreath to the children, and then left. And there was a lot of attacks on Starmer. Everyone felt very dissatisfied and unhappy, and there was some riots took place in a number of cities. Anger about the uncontrolled immigration into the United Kingdom. This, of course, is a long-standing issue. And then what the government did was to unleash the full fury of the state against the rioters. Everything else about this incident was essentially stuffed under the bed. No one could talk about it. So we can't possibly talk about it. Because that would jeopardize the legal proceedings. And people were being arrested and hauled before courts really within a couple of hours of their arrests, and then sent into prison. So some people were arrested for essentially throwing bricks at police cars, throwing bricks at windows, and then they went down for quite stiff sentences. But of course others were arrested for their Facebook posts. But in the meantime, no one could talk about this incident. In fact, that the actual incident itself was just simply pushed, below the surface. That's it. It's not something we should ever talk about. And Starmer, he talked about these far-right thugs. I don't know how many times he spoke about this. The news conference, as he said, the courts are going to really make a a lesson out of these people. And then, you know, again, people were being arrested and put in prison for Facebook posts, and because they were providing misleading information. The culprit allegedly was not an illegal immigrant. He was not an illegal immigrant. He was as British as you or I are. That was the story. Um, but of course, you know, it did come out even at the time that he really wasn't as British as you or I are. He was a second generation immigrant. His father came from, or his parents came from Rwanda. He was born, yes, in Wales, but nonetheless, you know, it still raises the question as to why his parents were allowed into the UK at all. And in any case, so what? I mean, if you whether he was born in the UK or he wasn't born in the UK, the whole point is what of immigration is the question. I mean, how is the country receiving the migrants, benefiting from the presence of the migrants? So even if the parents were law-abiding people, their son wasn't, and that often happens. That the second generation of immigrants are extremely unhappy about the country that they're living in. They didn't choose to live there, and act in violent, you know, socially repugnant ways. And so even if you say, oh, well, he's not an illegal immigrant, but nonetheless, he is an immigrant. And then the nonsense that somehow, well, he's as British as you or I are just because he was born in the UK. I mean, this is the usual liberal fantasy of that somehow, you know, where if you're born in this such and such a place, then you are whatever that country. So of course, you have to then believe that if we are born in Nigeria, then we are Nigerians, and that's it. You know, hey, you're a Nigerian. You know, if you were born in Japan, and you lived your life in Japan, you just become automatically Japanese. You know, and that's all there is. Or, you know, even according to this argument, you don't necessarily have to be born there. You know, if you go there, live for a number of years there, even learn the language, after a while acquire the citizenship of a particular country, you can say, okay, well, now you're Japanese. You know, you're Japanese. It's a nonsensical notion, deliberately fostered by liberals, that somehow your citizenship defines your nationality. Because you know, more serious countries were able to separate the two. There's such a thing as citizenship, which is a legal category, and nationality, which of course is a much more complex definition, which, you know, refers to language, culture, religion, and so on. So just because this person was born in Wales doesn't make him a Welshman. And so that's why we go to this some guy looks like a real psycho in the pictures with a Rastafarian haircut. Oh well, he's a Welshman. He's as Welshman as Tom Jones and Richard Burton and Dylan Thomas, Owen Glendower. You know, there's as Welsh as they are. It's of course nonsensical, but even more serious than that. The problem is that the full might of the state was thrown against the Britons, who were very upset about this mass migration, mass uncontrolled migration that's been going on for decade after decade, despite politicians' promises that they would bring it to an end. And particularly the Tories. You know, the Tories have campaigned for years about, you know, controlling immigration, and they've absolutely done nothing about it. So they let their frustration get the better of them. Now, that's not to defend, you know, throwing bricks at police cars, or, you know, even throwing rocks at police or whatever. Nonetheless, those are minor crimes in comparison with this crime that had occurred. You know, this mass stabbing mass stabbing, by a person who really shouldn't be in the country. I mean, that's the point. I mean, any immigration has to be to the benefit of the receiving country. In some ways, that is the receiving country that benefits from having Rwandans there. Now, what this Rwandan was doing in the UK was driving taxis. So again, we're supposed to believe that taxi driving is another one of those jobs that indigenous Britons are not willing to do, and so you have to import people from all over the world because no one is prepared to drive a taxi. Well, of course, it's completely ridiculous. Taxi driving is actually quite a good job, quite a lucrative job, and there's always a need for taxi drivers. But in any case, even if on that night, I think it was in late July of 2024, even if not that night, people had got it wrong that that this wasn't an illegal immigrant, somebody who had recently come into the country. Even if they were wrong about that, they weren't wrong that the problem was uncontrolled mass migration into the UK. And while the government was just throwing these people behind bars, and of course the courts were happy simply to act out Starmer's vindictive, vicious agenda, because he basically said, we're really going to throw the book at these rioters, the far right thugs. And the courts were eager to do it. And they did it because lawyers were pushing their hapless clients into pleading guilty. Well, lawyers always do that. It means less work for them. That means they don't have to do go through a trial rigmarole. They tell, hey, your best bet, plead guilty, and you'll just get a tap on the wrist. As it happened, they pleaded guilty, and they got a hell of a lot more than just simply a tap on the wrist. They got substantial prison terms. And that went on. You remember, back in the summer, this went on for a couple of months. This war that Keir Starmer was waging against the far right thugs in the UK. Now, the problem, and then now it's just turned out, well, this person was not just psychotic, but he was clearly influenced by jihadism. So now they tell us that. So again, those rioters, those far right thugs, were not wrong. Were not far wrong in what they believed at that time. Now, the government, of course, does what Keir Starmer is instinctively driven to do, which is, now we can crack down. Oh, who should we crack down on? Well, let's crack down on the internet. Because, of course, apparently he was influenced by the internet. So if this person was influenced by what he saw on the internet, then we need to crack down on the internet to make sure that nobody gets to see what they want to see on the internet. And that's, of course, the instinctive response of Starmer. Starmer is a kind of a walking embodiment of the censorship regime. He really always wants to crack down on the public, just suppress, repress, prevent, ban, abolish. That's the instinctive view of Starmer. So that's now we need to crack down on the internet. Absolutely, it's the internet that caused these murders in Southport. So we've gone from the far right thugs to the internet. So, and of course, Elon Musk or whoever is going to be the target. I mean, obviously, it's going to be Zuckerberg as well. Zuckerberg now is out of favor. Ever since he endorsed Trump, so they're going to try and crack down there. And then Yvette Cooper, or better known as Yvette Balls, because she was married to Ed Balls, former Labor minister. So Yvette Cooper has said, well, we got to crack down. So we always have to crack down. We got to crack down on knife violence. We got to make sure people aren't able to purchase knives. I'm not quite sure how one does that, because knives are kind of a fairly useful tool. I mean, everybody kind of needs a knife for something. I mean, you got to cut your meat with something. So, a steak knife, when it's cutting a steak, is harmless. Is doing good work. However, a steak knife is a lethal weapon also. So, but boy, she wants to crack down on the purchase of knives. So it's a kind of a variation from the response that you get in the United States whenever there's a mass shooting. We need to crack down on guns. We need to prevent lawful possession of guns. Lawful citizens from owning lawfully guns that they use in an exclusively lawful manner. We've got to prevent that because some crazy person used a gun, but killing a lot of children. We have to prevent lawful people from using lawful guns in a lawful way. That's the logic of this people. And then the same here. Now you don't really have a gun issue in the UK. There isn't a large scale gun ownership in the UK. So we got to go to the knives. The knife. We got to deal with the knife issue. And that was the response of Yvette Bulls. So some essay just says, "Hey, was he a Muslim?" It's very hard in Britain to get anything out of the authorities. They lie through their teeth, and it looks like he converted to Islam. It's not been confirmed, but that's what it appears to be, that he had converted to Islam and was now influenced by jihadism. I mean, again, it's very hard because there wasn't really a trial. He pleaded guilty. So initially he pleaded not guilty, but on Monday, that was yesterday, he pleaded guilty, which means there's not going to be a trial, which means that we're not going to find out very much out. It's possible that the prosecutors will tell us a little more. I don't think, when you're in Britain, you have to assume that the authorities are going to lie and they're not going to tell you anything about anything. So they're not going to tell you the Muslim, all in the spirit of intercommunal harmony. We must not allow any racism. We mustn't allow any Islamophobia. And therefore, we mustn't encourage anyone to engage in any Islamophobia. So they say, in the name of that, we will not reveal whether he was a Muslim. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Now, in this case, with this 18-year-old, he was 17 when he actually committed the crimes, but I think he's 18. In his case, he had already been alerted to the this government anti-extremism organization. So he'd already come under suspicion that there was something very unusual about him. I think 3 times, but no one followed up on that. But that's the whole point. No one ever follows up on these things because we mustn't engage in Islamophobia. It's okay to engage in Anglophobia, to engage in the far right thugs and their enablers on Facebook. That's okay. That you can do. You can do that to your heart's content. The far right thugs. But heaven forbid that you should bring up anything about Muslim, anything negative about Muslim. So in the name of that, the police have basically kept quiet about it. That just as they kept quiet for years and years about the grooming gangs, and even now when we talk about these grooming gangs, I don't know anyone who watches that awful person, Piers Morgan. He has his shows and they say, no, these are not Muslim grooming gangs. They're just Pakistani grooming gangs. They're just only Pakistanis. No, you're Pakistani. No one else. Just the Pakistani grooming gangs. Well, even if you have the grooming, even if this specific issue of these grooming gangs were Pakistani, There is a real problem with Muslim men in the Western countries, and it's universal throughout Europe that women complain all the time that they are harassed, physically assaulted by Muslim men. I mean, even if it's not grooming gangs, they are regularly under physical assault from Muslim men, many times from Afghanistan. I don't know how many articles I read about the Afghani problem in Germany and Austria. I mean, there, it's not just the sort of the raping and the sexual assault of women, but done on an individual basis. Now, it's not a grooming gang. That's not a gang as such. Is they do it individuals, boys as well as girls. So boys as well as girls are the victims of this. But this ridiculous thing. Oh well, it's just the Pakistanis. Don't paint it all with a broad brush. Not all Muslims. It's just the Pakistanis, and everyone just repeats this on Piers Morgan. Yes, of course, it's all Pakistanis. It's untrue. You go to Sweden, go to Germany, Austria. They don't complain about Pakistanis. They say they're individual Muslims who engage in sexual assaults. And again, it's this. Oh well, that's it. No, we can't do it with a broad brush. But you can do it with a broad brush when you start talking about the far right thugs, and that somehow that's a reflection of British racism and so on. Now, so that's the way you excuse it and say, oh, the fraud. But of course, whenever one wants to generalize, then of course one generalizes. I mean, remember the case of there was the George Floyd. No one hesitated to use the George Floyd killing. In fact, it's not even correct to say it's a killing. I mean, George Floyd died of OD. I mean, the guy was high as a kite, filled with fentanyl, and he died. He OD'd. But nonetheless, boom! That was that event was used to generalize about the prevalence of white racism, institutionalized white racism in America. And then, of course, it quickly spread to institutionalized white racism in the UK, institutionalized white racism everywhere else. I mean, even in Hungary, there were pro-George Floyd demonstrations. So they didn't say, hey, well, there was a white cop. It was a bad white cop in Minnesota and conducting an arrest of a known felon with a criminal record as long as your arm. It was an arrest that went wrong. No. It's an indictment of Western of a racist white society. And guess who was involved in that generalization? Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer, he was then leader of the opposition. He did his taking the knee routine, and the famous photographs of him and Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party. I just find it so funny just to call her the deputy leader. She's such a nitwit, but she's the deputy leader. They both took the knee over George Floyd, so they were perfectly happy. Let's generalize about that. Now, of course, as I say, as it turned out, when the trial of the Minnesota cops took place, the issue of racism didn't even come up. They never attempted to suggest that the police were motivated by racism. And again, as we learned more, and it was obvious even then, learned more, that the initial autopsy said he died of natural causes. There was just no evidence that he choked, or that he was asphyxiation, or he died that he couldn't breathe, and none of that. All of that thing about that he was died of asphyxiation. I said no evidence of that. What there is an evidence of is it was a massive quantities of drugs in his body. Um, but nonetheless, it was Derek Chauvin. He went to prison, even though he was doing what police are supposed to do. He was carrying out an arrest for somebody who had committed a crime. But anyway, and Starmer was happy to engage in this kind of broad brush generalization, the kind of things that he condemns these far right thugs who belong behind bars of engaging in. What's kind of interesting is that you have these people who are the sort of the far right thugs, and they do have an inherent patriotism. They have a sort of love of their country. They're very unhappy about mass migration transforming their countries. These are very poor people. They don't have a great deal going for them in their lives. They don't have much money. They don't have a great deal of education. They don't have much in the way of economic prospects or any likelihood that they will ever be making good money. But nonetheless, they have some patriotism. They still have something called their country that they feel emotional about. And they feel that that country is being taken away from them by a mass migration policy being encouraged by the ruling elite. Now, the ruling elites despise these people because they're uneducated, they're unwashed, they're ugly, they're poor, they don't talk properly, and so they have nothing but contempt for them. But it is interesting because these people, the far right thugs, could quite easily embrace a kind of a Bolshevism, a kind of a communism. They could say, hey, look, this is a system that is rigged by a rich class of people who make very good money for themselves. They distribute the money among themselves. They don't in any way suffer from the consequences of mass migration. They live in very salubrious districts in the great cities. And they travel from home to work in nice cars. They don't actually even get to witness too many migrants. And so these are the people who are exploiting us. And they could quite easily just instead put two and two together and say, we need a radical change. We need a revolution here. We need to get rid of all these rich people. There aren't really that many of them, and have a revolution. Luckily for the ruling elites, they don't think like that. Luckily there aren't any Bolsheviks around. There aren't any Lenins around, or anyone. So they express their frustration and anger about the mass migration, which is not just overtaken their districts, but it's taken jobs away from them. It's simply wiped out local businesses. I mean, where there used to be small businesses, shops, cafes that were run by local people, now they're all run by Pakistanis or Bangladeshis or whatever. So when you get somebody like King Charles, who of course despises these people, they're his citizens, but they're his subjects, but he despises them. He should count himself very, very lucky that these people don't turn their anger against him, that they don't threaten his way of life, his kind of very privileged existence. This wonderful tradition that as embodied, and I've talked about this before, as embodied during the coronation. 700 years of tradition and all this wonderful ritual. Always we had Edward the Confessor, and so on. And everybody loves this. The long, wonderful tradition. unbroken chain of generations as embodied in Charles. Yeah, for him, yeah, that's nice. He gets his tradition, he gets his rootedness. Nobody else gets that. The far right thugs don't get that. They don't get any tradition. That the towns that they lived in, the towns their parents lived in, have been completely transformed beyond any recognition. They don't get that tradition. They don't get going back to Edward the Confessor, Ethelred the Unready, or anything like that. And then you get to despise them instead of being appreciative and saying, well, it's kind of touching that people who are this poor, this lacking any economic prospects, any real anything much to look forward to, that people like that feel nonetheless a great patriotism towards their country. And then you have to ask, what is it that they feel so patriotic about? What is it that they love about their country? I mean, it doesn't do much for them, but nonetheless, they have some sort of attachment to it. I mean, as expressed in the fact that they don't like their country being transformed by mass migration. Instead, they just get dubbed as, racist. They're obviously it's all a product of racism and, ignorance, and they're just far right thugs. But nonetheless, they have a certain patriotism. And instead of any real receiving appreciation for, being patriotic about a country and a society that doesn't do much for them, by the fact that they even feel any sort of attachment to King Charles, who despises them, who obviously despises them. He makes no secret of despising them. It's kind of charming. And as I say, I think that they're very, very lucky, Charles and Starmer and all the rest. I think they're lucky that there's no real radicalism around. There's no Lenin around. There's no kind of radical movement saying, why don't we just hang a few people up on the lampposts? These people deserve nothing better. So, but anyway, after all the hysteria and all the mass imprisonments of the far right thugs and all the threats from Keir Starmer, it turns out that they were more or less correct. This was a psychotic. He was a second-generation immigrant, and therefore the whole this project of mass migration, the idea, once you come in, you become as British as the indigenous people. Boom, one generation on, and the guy, he's a Welshman. Eating fish and chips, watching the football on Sunday afternoon, and then that's it. So that he's in Britain. So that idea, that multicultural idea, that idea that it doesn't matter where you're from, you just bring them over, and in no time at all, you become a loyal, patriotic citizen. That obviously has gone out of the window of really. We can't expect Starmer and Yvette Balls to acknowledge that, but that's the only conclusion one can draw from this. So anyway, that's the news from Britain. Now, in some ways, you can see this in the United States. The fact that Trump has made it a priority to address the migration issue, and he acknowledges that this is a really serious issue. The British ruling elites, whether it's Starmer, whether it's Liz Truss, whether it's Rishi Sunak or Johnson or the rest of them, they never really acknowledged it. This was just an issue that you trot out at election time to show, yeah, we care about immigration. Yeah, we're going to do something about it. Just something you say at election time. But at least Trump, he's doing something about it now. Obviously, the most interesting and important act that he performed on January the 20th was the birthright citizenship executive order, according to which supposedly, again, total fantasy. I mean, there was never any real basis for it. Everyone's just always repeated it, that just because you were born in the United States, you automatically become a citizen of the United States. So it's a nonsensical idea. Why would anyone just simply say, oh, well, hey, you were born here, therefore you were automatically a citizen? Because, of course, if that were the case, then it would just encourage people precisely to come in and give birth in the United States and say, hey, well, now my child is a citizen, and I, as the mother, I get to stay here with my child. And of course, it was a fraud. It was always a fraud. It was a willful misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment. Because if the 14th Amendment had intended to say that anybody born on the United States soil, United States territory, is automatically a citizen of the United States, then they would have said so. Very simple. Just say, if you're born in the United States, you're automatically a citizen of the United States. Just say it. But they didn't say it. That's not what the 14th Amendment says. They talk about, subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. So why did they put that in? Well, they obviously said that that's the crucial issue, whether you are subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. If you are in the country illegally, then you are not subject to the jurisdiction of the government, because by definition, the government doesn't even know that you're here. Because if the government knew that you were here, then the government would knew you were here illegally, then the government would take steps to remove you. Similarly, if you're here on a tourist visa, you're a kind of a short-term visitor, you're still not really subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And so again, this was done precisely. This misinterpretation was done in order, again, to encourage migration. So this was really the big executive order. That was the one that is going to be the most significant. And it's clear that this is. I mean, we've now had these 18 states that are filing a lawsuit against Trump. They claim that against Trump. That's wonderful that they go to all the trouble. They within hours they're already filing a lawsuit against Trump on behalf of people whose claim to be Americans is very dubious. As I say, does anyone really here think that, well, if you were born in Japan, you come from, I don't know, wherever. Let's say you come from Wales, and you're born in Japan, you become automatically Japanese. I mean, and people are going to take you to be Japanese. Oh, he's as Japanese as you are. As Japanese as sashimi. I mean, it's no one would take that seriously. But I think that's why this is an important issue, and I imagine it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, and therefore it'll be very interesting to see how the Supreme Court is going to rule on this. It's going to be a tight one. I mean, obviously we know how the three so-called liberal justices. Well, we know how they're going to vote. I guess probably. Amy Coney Barrett will probably join the liberals. Roberts, I don't know. I don't know about Roberts, but I mean, he's going to be, I think, the swing vote. It's going to be a very tight. It's going to be a tight one. Which way it's going to go? But I'm glad Trump has now raised the issue, because I think it's long been a very sore point in the United States. Of simply allowing this thing to continue. That somehow an absurdity, an obvious absurdity. Everyone knows it's by common sense that it's an absurdity that somebody comes into the country illegally, has a child illegally. I don't know. A child is not. You don't have a child illegal, but can't enter the country illegally, has a child in that country, and therefore her act of illegality, her crime of entering the United States is now rewarded with a citizenship. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it cannot make any sense. It cannot, therefore, the, the drafters of the 14th Amendment could not have meant that, because it would be an encouragement of illegality. So this is an issue that long should have been addressed. Now, the other thing, obviously, that Trump did yesterday was the pardons of for the January the 6th people, and then pardons plus commutations. And of course, there's the meltdown on CNN, MSNBC, blah blah blah. Entirely predictable. But first of all, you have to say that this is something that Trump promised throughout his campaign, and as Obama used to say, well, elections have consequences, and if you promise something, and you win an election, then you're kind of supposed to fulfill your promises. I mean, you said you're going to do something, then you are expected to do it. I mean, now we're so used to politicians along the lines of the Tories, the British Tory party. I mean, because they're just so classic, of just absolutely promising whatever they need to promise to win an election. And then they do none of the things, absolutely not one of the things that they promised to do. We're so used to that. That the idea of that Trump is actually going to go ahead and fulfill his promise has caused a sensation. But again, there's all this hysteria, and again, if you watch CNN, they all repeat this. They repeat this nonsense that the rioters, the insurrectionists, rioters and insurrectionists killed police officers that day. They repeat this, and then CNN has the nerve to do fact checking. Well, we're fact checking Trump. Trump lied about this. Trump lied. Another lie from Trump. But just watch their coverage. Watch their coverage of January the 6th. The coverage that they had yesterday, and it was lie after lie after lie. Because we don't even have to go into it. No police officer was killed as a result of January the 6th. None, not one. And in fact, all the stories that were put about that the police officer was hit over the head with a fire hydrant, or with a fire extinguisher rather. It was a lie. It was a lie. He was not hit with over the head with a fire extinguisher. He did die the next day of natural causes. He died of a blood clot. And but nonetheless, this was continually repeated, and repeated yesterday. Oh, Trump is pardoning cop killers. And so they just continue to repeat. They had Elizabeth Warren on. She repeated this. Oh, there were 5 police officers killed. That day. Of course, no one ever mentions who actually was killed on that day, and that was, actually one of the January the 6th protesters who was shot in cold blood by a police officer who was not in any way threatened by her. There was absolutely no need for him to use lethal force. But of course, that's all been he was nonetheless celebrated and somehow heroic that he actually shot a rather petite young woman dead. So that's wonderful. So there's the meltdown, but of course, Trump, I think you can hardly say that these people were not punished. I mean, obviously, everyone who was involved on January 6th has been severely punished for the past 4 years. I mean, it's not just the imprisonment that a number of them have already been imprisoned, but they've had to go through the whole criminal procedure, which is quite painful and quite expensive. As Biden said in his explanation as to why he was providing a preemptive pardon to members of his family. Oh well, it's a painful procedure to when the government comes after you. Yeah, that's kind of it is indeed painful, and particularly painful since the people who were involved in the January the 6th protests were rather impecunious. They didn't have much money. So when the government comes after you, you don't have too many options. You can't go to some crack lawyer. And of course, even if given that you're facing a DC jury, even if you got the crack lawyer, if you got Clarence Darrow to come in and defend you, even if you did that, they're still going to find you guilty. I mean, it just doesn't matter. I mean, if you're a Trump supporter and you go before a DC jury, they're going to find you guilty. And they're going to, CNN was talking about, they were tried by a jury of their peers. Well, no, they're not. You're not tried by a jury of your peers. You're tried by a DC jury, which is so politicized that they will always convict anyone who's a Republican, and they will always acquit anyone who was a Democrat. And something that I have to say that I wasn't, or at least I'd forgotten that. I mean, it didn't. It hadn't crossed my radar in a long time. The DC jury actually found John Hinckley not guilty. Remember, John Hinckley had attempted to assassinate President Reagan, and he was brought to trial, and the DC jury found John Hinckley not guilty by dint of insanity. In other words, they said no, he was just mentally incompetent. This is a completely ridiculous decision. Of course, I mean, he clearly planned this killing. But so no, by dint of insanity, he was not guilty. And so instead of going to prison, he went to a psychiatric hospital. Now, that's a DC jury. I mean, even the guy who shot Ronald Reagan was found not guilty by a DC jury. So the idea that you would ever be able to get any kind of a fair trial in DC if you're a Trump supporter, that's obviously absurd. So these people had already gone through a great deal, and since even the ones who say, "Oh, what are the people who were involved in violence?" But even if they were involved in violence, and the question of what happened with the violence is a dubious one as to who started the violence and how it came about. And whether the police provoked the violence, because it looked, one could see the footage. There was quite a lot of provocation. I mean, that for no reason at all, police were using excessive force against the protesters with tear gas and so on. So, there should have been really from the start a serious, proper investigation, a public inquiry as to what happened on January the 6th, not the nonsense that Nancy Pelosi's committee engaged in. But in any case, even if you say, oh, these people they had engaged in violence against the police, then you say, okay, well, how did other people who had engaged in violence against the police, how what kind of treatment did they get? So you have to say, so any kind of punishment has to be comparable to the punishment meted out for similar crimes. So that, when you have riots and protests and there were skirmishes with the police, what kind of punishment was meted out. And if it turns out that the January the 6th people were grossly and disproportionately punished, then that's obviously wrong, and that cannot stand. That, punishment has to be comparable. You can't just simply say, well, we don't like those people, so we're going to shove them in prison for years and years. But these people, well, we kind of like them, Black Lives Matter, whatever. So no prison time for you, even if you engaged in violence against the police. So I think that that was an entirely reasonable action on the part of Trump to do across the board. And the people who were getting the most ridiculous prison sentences, 18 years, like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, those are just absurd. I mean, these were people who weren't even at the Capitol. The whole idea that they was thinking in terms of overthrowing the government and there was none of that. No, how are you going to overthrow the government? I mean, this is about the most powerful government in the world, and you're going to overthrow it, without using any guns. It just a mob outside the Capitol, and you're going to overthrow the government. So it was obviously the whole thing was contrived, and the sentences were ludicrous. 18 years, it was 22 years. So, I think that was all perfectly reasonable. And so the flurry of executive orders, I think a lot of them are quite reasonable. Mount McKinley, I think that's fine. I think McKinley was actually quite a good president. Assassinated, now forgotten. But he was actually a pretty good president, and so that was renaming the Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America. I really I don't care that much, either way. I know a lot of people don't like the fact that Trump talks about Panama and taking back the Panama Canal. Now, the thing about that is, as I said, look, great powers ultimately get to do the kinds of things great powers do. So they decided, the great powers, they built the canal, and they could have kept the canal, but instead, we'll be very generous and we'll give it to Panama. Panama didn't build the canal, but we'll give it to Panama. And that's fine, and that's nice and generous. There was nothing wrong with what Jimmy Carter did. But you also have to keep in mind that you get to keep it for as long as a great power doesn't get fed up with it. That's you said, okay, well, that's nice, you have it, and and look after it. But at some point, a great power will just get fed up with it and say, no, we want it back. We've decided that we need to control the canal for our security. And I think that's the way of the world. And incidentally, I mean, when the Russians took back Crimea, that was, more or less the reasonable justification. Now, the Russians still talked about, we had a referendum, and then the public voted, and so on, and make that argument. Okay, you can make that argument. It's not a convincing argument. But the point was that Khrushchev took Crimea and, just simply gave it to Ukraine. It didn't matter too much because it was one country, the USSR at the time. But Khrushchev, and he did many things without thinking about the long-term consequences. You can't assume that the USSR will live in perpetuity. At some point, it could dissolve, and then Crimea, which obviously belongs to Russia, it's something that's vital, valuable to the Russians, is now in the hands of the Ukrainians. And Khrushchev did a lot of things like that. I mean, Khrushchev It's all forgotten. He's basically he forgave the wartime collaborators um, who had collaborated with the Nazis, and he allowed these collaborators to return to their country. So he allowed all the people, all the Banderites, to return to Ukraine, and there were no real punishment meted out to these Banderites who came back to Ukraine, starting in the late 1950s. And again, hey, that's going to have long-term consequences, because these Banderites are going to come in and they're going to start, um, with their Ukrainian nationalism. And at some point, that's going to be a problem because Khrushchev didn't really think about that. So in the same way, he didn't really think about Crimea. At some point, that is going to be a problem. If the USSR dissolves and Ukraine now has the control of Crimea, and you've allowed all these Banderites to come back to Ukraine, well, there's going to be an explosive mix. But in any case, so what was reasonable is at that moment when you got this very hostile government in Kiev following the coup against Yanukovych, even if at that moment there was no immediate threat to Crimea, I think it was entirely reasonable for Russia to say, we're going to take Crimea. That's it. That's it. We gave you this chance. 1991, we overlooked it. There were plenty of people living in Crimea who said that, we want to be a part of Russia. Over and over again, Russia didn't do anything about it. So for 25 years, we did nothing about it. But, enough is enough. We're going to take back Crimea. And that's all there is to it. And I think that's a reason. And of course, one could say, but no one was threatening Crimea. There was no one wanted to take Crimea, to use Crimea against Russia or whatever. It doesn't matter. There was a favor. Khrushchev gave Ukraine this favor. Russian leaders from 1991 on had pretended to accept that Crimea it's an integral part of Ukraine. Crimea belongs to Ukraine. Crimea is Ukrainian. Like Welshman. Crimea is Ukrainian. Everyone knows Crimea is Russian. Crimea is Ukrainian. Oh, that's Ukrainian. Definitely Ukrainian. And then they said, no, we're going to take it back. And I think it was entirely reasonable. So I think that if the United States decide we're kind of fed up with this, we're going to take Panama back. It was a mistake giving it to Panama. Then that's the way the world works. No one's going to do anything about it. No one's going to say boo. Not a dog will bark, and it will be a done deal. Coop, I see somebody said Russia should take back Alaska for their security. I agree with you, incidentally. I think it was a really, really stupid thing to do to sell Alaska to the United States. I mean, that was really dumb. So I think Russia should indeed take back Alaska. So that's why I think that was a reasonable act. Now, what I found very troubling, though, yesterday in the Oval Office was when Trump talked about Russia, and let me just say there's quite a interesting. It's in Political. Let's see if I can find it. Let's go back here. And I don't know if people can see it, but I'll just read it out. It's in Politico, quoting Trump because he was asked about Russia and Ukraine as he was signing these executive orders, and so Trump says Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky told me, he just said Zelensky told me he wants to make a deal. I don't know if Putin does. He might not. I think he should make a deal. I think he's destroying Russia by not making a deal. Trump said at the Oval Office on the first day of his second presidency. I think Russia is kind of in big trouble. You take a look at their economy. You take a look at their inflation in Russia. I got along with Putin great. I would hope he wants to make a deal. And then the Politico goes on. Journalists repeatedly asked Trump about his promises to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine and reminded him he had promised to do so on his first day in office. And then Trump said, "Well, I have another half of the day left." And then he says that Trump said Putin couldn't be happy with the slow progress of his war against Ukraine. Nearly 3 years after he ordered an all-out assault, and 11 years after disguised Russian troops. This is Politico talking, and then this is a quote from Trump. Trump saying he's grinding it out. Most people thought it would last about a week, and now you're into 3 years. It's not making him look good, Trump said. We have numbers that almost 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed. About 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers are killed. Russia's bigger. They have more soldiers to lose. But that's no way to run a country. So if you then think about that, what Trump is saying there, and I think this is quite ominous. If I were Russian, I think these words are quite ominous. And this is what I've always said about Trump. Trump looks at Russia and he sees a weak country. That's it. He just said it there. You know, he's not interested in the rights and wrongs of this war. He has never been interested in the rights and wrongs of it. He's basically saying, you know, if Russia were to win this war quickly, he'd say, okay, well, that's the way it is. Russia's big, strong. Ukraine isn't big and strong. Russia's won the war. But Russia has not won this war. And Trump knows that Russia has not won this war. So Trump does the calculation and says, well, you know, this war has been going on for 3 years. We all assumed, including me, and he said it at the time. If you recall what he said at the time of the invasion, he thought that, it'll be, you know, he assumed, like many others, that it'll all be over very quickly. And in fact, he was praising Russia. He said, I think he said Putin is brilliant because, of course, he assumed that Russia will prevail very quickly. But Russia hasn't. And the longer this war goes on, and we've talked about this many times here, the longer it goes on, the more Western powers, and particularly when you've got somebody like Trump in charge, they're going to conclude that Russia is weak. And if Russia's weak, then we can escalate. We will use our powers to, you know, make Russia suffer, to make Russia want to sue for peace. And without question, that's what Trump is doing. The whole thing about drill, baby, drill, there's going to basically, boom, we're going to have this energy glut thanks to Trump. That is going to drive down the prices of energy. That's going to be a serious issue for Russia. You know, energy is Russia's key export, and that's going to really hurt the Russian economy. So the Russian economy is already in some trouble, and now with this Trump policy of just unleashing, you know, America's energy capacities, that's going to hit Russia seriously. You know, and he learned this from what Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s. Again, increase oil production, and that drove down oil prices. I think they're going to do that to Russia. But the other thing is, of course, that, you know, again, Russia hasn't won this war and isn't really able to win this war in any, you know, simple time frame. I mean, if Putin could say, look, give us 3, 4, 5 months. I mean, when I say he'll say to his military, the Kremlin, he say, if we can wrap this up in 3, 4, 5 months, whatever wrap it up means, we can, at the very least, we'll have the 4 oblasts, you know, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye. We can get that, drive all the Ukrainians out. So we'll have that. We will have accomplished that. With that, these 4 oblasts are now part of the Russian Federation. We've driven out the Ukrainian forces. We have accomplished something. We haven't accomplished much. We haven't accomplished a regime change in Kiev. We haven't it ended NATO expansion, but we accomplished something. The problem is that Russia hasn't even accomplished that minimum, and now they have Trump to deal with. And what's going on in Trump's mind? And I think that his comments there in the Oval Office are very clear. He's issuing a warning to Russia and saying, "You better do a deal. You're not doing well. You're not winning this war. We don't really think that you're very strong. We can make life very, very unpleasant for you." And that's not a good situation for Russia. Unless it can find some way, maybe they can just play for time for the next 6 months. While the 6 months of toing and froing and negotiations and whatever, peace conference, meeting between Trump and Putin, all kinds of things that you can fill out the next 6 months. But unless he can do that, Russia is going to be subjected to a massive American onslaught, because it seems, even just from that comment, that Trump has concluded that Zelensky wants a deal, but Putin doesn't. That's not a good situation. And I've always thought that the Russians may well look back on the Biden years as better years than the Trump years. I mean, Trump may well really escalate things to make life difficult. Russia obviously should have won the war during the past 3 years. It didn't take the steps that it needed to, which I think it should have been. Once the initial plan failed, which I think was to topple Zelensky and force Zelensky to sign in a sense, a kind of a surrender. Once that plan failed, then they needed to throw everything they had in order at least to secure the four oblasts, because I think now it's going to be quite difficult. So we'll see about that. The other thing is, of course, and we talked about this the other day, which was the Iran deal that wasn't. And as I said, I don't think Iran is very happy with Russia. Iran felt, with some justice, that Russia let Syria down. That Russia, in fact, even could and should have done a lot more to keep Assad in power. Whatever, the rights and wrong, Assad did this, or Assad didn't do this, or whatever his failings as a leader, there was corruption and whatever, and Assad was making nice with these, the Arab states in the Gulf, whatever your complaints. Assad needed to be kept in power. It was your one shot to maintain a presence in the Middle East. It was basically also the connection between Lebanon and Hezbollah to Iran. And now that it's gone, I mean, Iran is much diminished. That's your strategic ally. So the Russian-Iran, they signed this strategic partnership when you've had this biggest, most almighty fiasco that just took place a few weeks ago. I mean, we're strategic partners. You had strategic partners. You couldn't even do anything to prop up your allies, Bashar al-Assad, your historic ally, your ally in the case of Russia since the 1971, in the case of Iran, going all the way back to the 1980s. You couldn't even get together and join forces to keep Assad in power. So now they signed a strategic partnership, which of course is a total dead letter. I mean, there's nothing in that strategic partnership that suggests that there's anything strategic about it, or there's a partnership involved. It just says it's we definitely promise that if either country gets involved in a war with a third country, we will not help that third country. Oh, well, thank you very much. Well, I appreciate your very generous offer. You won't help the third puncher. So if you get bombed by the United States, that's in the case of Iran, which could happen. The United States could bomb Iran. So if the United States bombs you, we're not actually going to come to your assistance. We're not going to provide you with anything to fight off the United States, but we will not join in the bombing. We will not ally ourselves with the United States in bombing you. Whoa, thank you very much. And similarly, yeah, I know you're in a war with Ukraine, but we're not going to help NATO in their war against you in Ukraine. Whoa, thank you. That's quite a partnership. But the fact is that I think Iran, I think, is obviously, we've talked about this, Iran is obviously very unhappy about the abandonment of Syria, and more seriously, that Russia really didn't do anything to stop Israel from bombing Iranian military equipment in Syria. That Russia didn't even deploy its air defense systems against Israeli aircraft, which was attacking Iranian installations. So that's that's how the Iranians see it. So that's that done. But anyway, let's now take a look at the a Gaggle page, which is this is the people who the key gagglers who maintain the dog's existence. Because these dogs, it's the winter time. They're very unhappy. These are not winter dogs, not designed to withstand winters. So they're in a really foul mood, and nothing can get them into a good mood this time of the year. But if you tell them, oh well, there's something in the tip jar, that might it might relieve some of the tensions. Anyway, that's and then let's look. Danaki, always good to see you. So Danaki says, has the golden age started already? Are they already dispensing milk and honey to every Talmud thumping MAGA bro out there? Well, I mean, obviously, there's a little bit much about the golden age. However, I have to say that he is the president of the United States. He's just come back. He won decisively. He was written off many times over the past 4 years. He looked as if he'd end up in prison. He looked as if he'd lose all his money and property. He withstood a couple of assassination attempts, and I just feel like he's entitled to soaring rhetoric. And so I didn't have any problem with that inaugural address. He's after all, he's a once the best for his country. He's a patriotic American. Now, I mean, when you talk about the Talmud thumping, and I think that is going to be the question, which is how is he going to handle the issue of Israel? And at this stage, I don't know, because we know that his intervention was decisive in order to affect this ceasefire hostage deal. And clearly, they applied he applied the pressure on Netanyahu. That got the deal. He applied the kind of pressure that clearly Blinken and Biden had never applied. So he did that. Now, obviously, there are plenty of people, especially on the alt media, who think that there's a deal, a secret deal in the works, whereby in exchange Netanyahu will be allowed to annex the West Bank. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure whether that's going to happen. Um, and the reason I'm not sure is that Trump is a businessman. He likes making money. It's a big thing for him, making money. As we've seen in this whole cryptocurrency thing, he's made some serious money there. He wants to make money. He knows that he's only going to be in power for 4 years. Then he'll be out of office, and then he returns to the helm of the Trump organization. And even if he doesn't return to the helm of the Trump organization, his family will be running the Trump organization, for years to come. And so he's thinking about, well, I've got to make sure that the Trump organization is doing well financially. Trump has all sorts of business interests in the Gulf. He has business interests in Saudi Arabia, and he wants good relations with them. I mean, back during his first term, his first visit, his first overseas trip was to Saudi Arabia. I mean, why did he choose Saudi Arabia? Well, that's where the money is. That's where he can make money, and he was even explaining in a um, kind of amusing way yesterday when he was asked what's going to be your first trip, and he brought up Saudi Arabia, and he said, well, if they offer me a more lucrative deal. I mean, it's lucrative enough for his organization, but for the government, they're going to buy, I don't know how many U.S. fighter aircraft. If it's a bigger deal than the one they promised in 2017, then Saudi Arabia will be my first port of call. So that's how he thinks. Now, what does he really care about in the Middle East? He wants the Abraham Accords. That's clearly what that's his baby, the Abraham Accords. I mean, I don't think much of it, of course. And I think it's I mean, the countries that have signed on to the Abraham Accords were not countries that were in any way fighting against Israel. So the idea that, well, they're now going to recognize Israel, well, who cares? Who cares what Morocco does? Who cares what United Arab Emirates does? I mean, it's very rich, but they were never really an adversary of Israel's. But Saudi Arabia is a different case. I mean, Saudi Arabia is clearly the leading state in the Arab world. So Saudi Arabia were to sign on to the Abraham Accords, and clearly Trump wants that, then that would be a big deal for him. And that's what he's going to pursue. Now, if that's his agenda, then that's not compatible with Israeli annexation of the West Bank. And given that he wants to cultivate these good relations with Saudi Arabia, both because of the Abraham Accords and because the Trump organization wants to do business in the Gulf, he isn't going to sign on to an Israeli annexation of the West Bank, because if he did that, that's it. That would put an end to any kind of rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. It's just they just would not accept that. And so I don't think Trump is going to accept annexation of the West Bank. Now, are there people in the administration who will be happy to see that? Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I'm sure the Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, and I'm sure Pete Hegseth, probably the next defense secretary, they'll all be very happy with an Israeli annexation of the West Bank. I don't think Trump will, and I think Trump is going to shape foreign policy. I don't think it's going to be like the first term, where Trump was easily, influenced and swayed by figures within the administration. I think that now he says, I run the foreign policy. And I think he would not sign on to annexation of the West Bank. And I think that if Netanyahu tried that, unilaterally just tried an annexation without getting the authorization from the United States, I think Trump would take steps against Israel. I think that would really piss him off, and that's why I don't think Netanyahu is going to do it. Netanyahu is a very crafty character. He's all big talk, but he senses what he can get away with and what he can't get away with. He knew that Biden and Blinken, they were never going to stop him. Blinken, in particular, is ideologically aligned with Israel. When he said, "I come here as a Jew," that's it. That told you straight away where Blinken's loyalties really lay. And Blinken obviously was the one who shaped the policy. Biden was just out of it. Trump isn't going to do that. Trump is not going to say, "Hey, I come here as a Jew." So I think that if Netanyahu knows this, and Netanyahu is not going to take the risk, and the Israelis are very sensitive about when they can and when they can't push the Americans around. If they think they can get away with it, if they can push the Americans, then they will. If they feel that that we have a president who really is very unhappy, then they back down, and that's why if you look at the record, we go going all the way back to Eisenhower and the Israeli occupation of Sinai after the '56 war. Once Eisenhower really began threatening sanctions against Israel, Israel quickly withdrew from Sinai. Just the same with when Reagan suddenly got fed up with what Begin was doing in Lebanon and said, you have to knock it off. Begin got the message and began the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon. George H.W. Bush and the withholding of loan guarantees to Israel. That's serious business. Israel Israel knows that the key to its survival is the United States. That's the key. Without the United States, Israel's done. So therefore, Israel can never get on the wrong side of the United States. So once they found that George H.W. Bush was really unhappy, then they started taking seriously the Madrid Peace Conference. You remember? I mean, that was what the Bush administration, they put forward that Madrid Peace Conference, and then Israel, of course, they did the usual thing. Like, what the hell do we care about the Madrid Peace Conference? They didn't really realize Shamir wasn't quite as smart as Netanyahu, but Shamir didn't really realize that the Bush administration really was very serious about that Madrid Peace Conference. And so when Israel just continued to build settlements, the Bush administration got very angry because, hey, you're undermining the Madrid Peace Conference. We've invested a lot of our reputation in organizing this conference, and now you're building settlements. And then they essentially took, in effect, kind of sanctions against Israel by withholding the loan guarantees, and then Israel climbed down and attended the Madrid Peace Conference, and out of that Madrid Peace Conference, came the Oslo Accords and so on. Again, Israel, as always, did what it could to undermine the Oslo Accords until it just rendered it null and void. But even George W. Bush, the hapless George W. Bush, got fed up at some point with what the Israelis were doing in Ramallah. Remember, they had the siege of Ramallah, the siege against Yasser Arafat in Ramallah, and then Bush really got fed up with this. He said, "You just can't do this," and he said, "Enough is enough." And that did lead eventually to one can't say it was a peace plan, but the closest we've come to any kind of a deal since Camp David in 2000. So the closest we came to was the Olmert plan, where there was going to be some kind of a land swap, and that was George W. Bush who had pushed for that, some kind of an agreement. And that was it. I mean, since then, that was about what, 2008, I think. Since then, there's been no plans whatsoever. And anyway, the areas I bring all this up is that Israel knows that if they incur the displeasure of Washington, then they're in trouble. And that's why I think that any annexation, unilateral annexation of the West Bank on the part of Netanyahu will be catastrophic. And I think Trump knows that if he were to sign off on an annexation of the West Bank, then that's it. I mean, all his plans in the Middle East are up in smoke. That's it. It's done. He's got nothing. He can do nothing now in the Middle East. It's just going to be his administration would just simply wind to an inconsequential conclusion, and it's gone. Like that part of the administration is already finished. In the Middle East, so it doesn't matter what the rabid Zionists think. That's not what Trump thinks. Anyway, NKMRD says a golden age only lasts for 72 hours nowadays, so enjoy. I think that's. I mean, you're obviously right. On the other hand, I think what Trump did with those executive orders will please his MAGA base for a while, for longer than 72 hours, because they'll say, hey, well, Trump has done what he said he would do. He didn't just simply, just let things go by. I mean, he actually did done what he said. He said so. He said he would deliver on the pardons for the January the 6th. He said he would reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. He said that he's going to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. He said he would withdraw from the World Health Organization. He said he would cancel the birthright citizenship, the right. So he's, so I think MAGA will be well pleased for a while. That's not going to last for very long, but for a while. And as long as CNN and MSNBC are fulminating against Trump, then that keeps his base happy. The more angry they are at Trump, the happier they are. Hey, well, Trump must be doing something right. Look at how crazy CNN is going. But and things like the Gulf of America that goes down well. The one thing I'm quite interested in is how is he going to do the Panama thing? I mean, is he planning an invasion of Panama? Or is he just planning to move in and grab control of the canal? I mean, it'll require a little bit of. I mean, it'll be a serious military operation. I mean, they invaded Panama in 1989 to remove Noriega. Of course, it was entirely a pretext, but at the time, the Americans had forces in the Panama Canal Zone, so that was still part of the agreement. But they withdrew all their forces in 1999. So now there are no American forces in the Canal Zone. So organizing an invasion of Panama, it can be done, but it'll be somewhat of an undertaking. That'll be a serious military operation. You'd have to send in airborne forces, very substantial airborne forces. So I don't know whether that's necessary. I think Trump wants to get his way just by bullying the Panamanian government into surrendering the canal. Says the golden age of ballooning, says Carlos. Okay. So yeah, Marty says, however vast the darkness, we must supply our own light. Who's that? Who's that picture, Marty? Is that Salman Rushdie? It looks like Salman Rushdie. But I wonder who says, however vast the darkness, we must supply our own light. Okay. I guess that's good. Anyway, Marty, always good to see you. Merry Tuesday, George and Gagglers. My heart goes out to all of you. Thank you so much. And then Summer Petros, thank you, Marty, as always, for your generosity. Thank you always for your very, very humorous postings. It's always hilarious. Looking at all the things you post, all those the footage from all the YouTube videos. It's a real pleasure seeing them. Summer Petra says you're absolutely right, George, about our Prince Chuck. Yes, that's it. Yeah, exactly. See, the Queen was able to maintain, at least to pretend, that she really cared about all her subjects. She probably didn't. But I think she took her responsibilities seriously, and she felt that she's supposed to be the queen of everybody. But then, of course, she got preoccupied with the ridiculous Commonwealth. She was the head of the Commonwealth, and of course, nobody in Britain, gave a hoot about the Commonwealth. But she took it seriously, and she was always traveling to all these countries, all these exotic countries which were part of the Commonwealth. And but her subjects in Great Britain didn't, they don't know why she's going to all these places. And she has to sit and watch all these ridiculous dances and strange foods that are being prepared and whatever. But she took all that very seriously, which means that she wasn't really taking seriously the plight of her subjects. I mean, which should have been her most important task. It doesn't matter about the Commonwealth because, of course, there was nothing in common, and above all, there was no wealth. So, but in the case of Charles is so much a part of that World Economic Forum, that whole globalist crowd, and all the people that he obviously loves hanging out with the sort of the various Bill Gateses and the rest of them. That he really despises. He absolutely despises ordinary people, and he just oozes his contempt. Just oozes from him. And I think it was clear even in his Christmas message that he was well satisfied with what the courts did to the far right thugs. The far right thugs who are patriotic Britons. They're patriotic. They care about their country, a country that gives them nothing, but they care about it. I mean, they may well have expressed their patriotism in an unfortunate way, but nonetheless, I mean, they obviously somehow they care. They care about the transformation of a country that they had inherited and probably hope to pass on to their next generation. Charles should be really flattered by this. Here are these really poor people, poor uneducated people, yet they feel such love for their own country. But he doesn't see that. He just sees dirty, grubby, stupid, uneducated, uncouth, inarticulate yobs who should be in prison. And that's why he and Starmer are thoroughly in agreement. Yeah, you got to put them in prison. And while you're at it, make sure that you censor all the nasty things people say on Facebook. Make sure you bring Twitter under control so that people don't get to express their views about people like me and my friends at the World Economic Forum. An awful person. Anyway, Judy, it was good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Nice, very, very nice to see you, Judy. And thank you so much for your generosity. And then Judy says, Elon Musk posted on the January 6 pardons. We came as soon as we could, but it was not soon enough to save Matthew Perner. Yeah. So let's just, I'll just click on that, the link. And this what was Musk saying. But there's no question. I mean, given the pressure that that people like this come under, Matthew Perner and others who come under from when the Justice Department comes to you. So it's the thread started with Andy Ngo. Matthew Perner was a 37-year-old Penn State graduate who committed suicide by hanging after he was convicted over January the 6th. He was posthumously pardoned by President Trump. And then Elon Musk says, we came as soon as we could, but it was not soon enough to say Matthew Perner. That's quite moving. We came as soon as we could, but it was not soon enough to save Matthew Palmer. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, that's rather touching. Um, I think, and that's what happens because when the Justice Department comes to you, and given also the media demonization, it destroys your life. You don't have any hope now of getting a good job, and you're young, so you've got pretty much your whole life ahead of you. You have no prospects now of getting any kind of a decent job. Therefore, you have no real prospects of making a living. You're also completely demonized, a hated, reviled figure, which means that your friends are going to avoid you. I mean, people who pretend to be your friends, they're going to start avoiding you. So it's quite likely that a number of people will go down this path of suicide. I mean, it's so overwhelming when the enormity of the Justice Department coming after you. You have no means of defending yourself. I mean, that happens with some of the people, those far right thugs in Keir Starmer's case, the two-tier Keir, the far right thugs who ended up in prison, and some of them also committed suicide, because it's just the strain on people's lives. And people are not thinking, oh well, maybe there's going to be there's going to be a change in the historical cycle. Trump will be back. We will be exonerated. We'll be released from prison. You don't really think that, because you're thinking, yeah, but the odds of that happening are very, very distant. And we all thought that. I mean, I thought Trump has a shot at returning, but there's so many hurdles along the way that it's quite possible that Trump himself will end up in prison. And he would have ended up in prison if he lost that election. He would have ended up in prison. There's absolutely no question of that. He would have ended up in prison, and for the rest of his life, he would not have got a pardon. He would have ended up in prison. So it's I mean that's very sad. That's very sad. But that's a nice nice message from Musk. Anyway, thank you very much, Judy, for posting that, and thank you, Judy, as always, for your generosity. Summer Petros, thank you also for your generosity. Carlos FR says birth tourism is a big thing in the States. Yeah, it is, and it's a complete. It shows that obviously this couldn't have been the intent of the 14th Amendment. It couldn't have been the goal of the drafters of the 14th Amendment to provide an incentive for people to break the law. Because if you do say that, well, it doesn't matter whether you're in the country illegally. If you give birth in the country, then your child is automatically granted a citizenship. That's a reward for illegality. Well, that couldn't have been the intent of the framers of the 14th Amendment, and that's why they put in that expression, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But everyone just ignores that and think that there's nothing there. Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. Thank you so much, as always, Cynthia, for your generosity. And Cynthia says, the SCOTUS ruled in favor of preemptive pardons back in 1866, but shouldn't this ruling now be overturned before preemptive pardons become so commonplace that they thoroughly undermine the rule of law? Or couldn't a POTUS such as Trump just sign an executive order to nullify these preemptive pardons, and thus forcing the SCOTUS to make such a ruling on it? Either way, preemptive pardons ought to be brought to an end before they bring the rule of law to an end. Well, I think you're probably right, but I don't think any president is going to take that risk. I mean, unfortunately, because of the lawfare that was waged by Obama and by Biden against Trump, that it's essentially, we don't any longer have a understanding that America once had, which is that you know a successor president doesn't use the law to go after his predecessor. And that was always the deal. We don't do that, and that's how we ensure that there is a peaceful transfer of power. Because of course, if a president felt that his successor is going to come after him, then he's not going to agree to leave office. And so the condition of people leaving office and entrusting government to their political opponent is that my political opponent isn't going to come after me. So I can quite see Trump. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 4 years? Everything. Trump is now on a high. Everyone's happy. He seems very strong. There's no Democrat on the horizon who can challenge Trump. And so you have to think, okay, well, yeah, let's get rid of these preemptive pardons. But 3 years time, Trump could be in all sorts of problems. I mean, all kinds of ways in which the Democrats are going to come after him. So let's see. I mean, I have no doubt that if the Democrats win the midterms, and it's not going to be that difficult for them to do it. If they win the midterms, they will impeach Trump. Now, they don't have the votes to convict him, but nonetheless, they will impeach him. But then, towards the end of his term, in 3 years' time, they're going to try and impeach him again. And then, what's the end result of if you impeach him? And if you succeed, then you remove his immunity. And so I think Trump has to think about his future. The Democrats have not abandoned their project of putting him behind bars. I mean, the Democrats have withdrawn, they've retreated, they're licking their wounds after November the 5th, but they haven't abandoned their project of putting him on trial. Not one of them has said anything in regret about what they did. The 4 separate criminal cases they pursued against him, all pursued by Democrat attorneys, attorney generals, DAs, or whatever. They're all Democrats. And they did it with a view to destroying Trump politically and essentially imprisoning him and letting him die in prison. So I think Trump has to think now, and I think he is thinking that hey, when 4 years time, I'm going to be leaving office. My successor could well be a Democrat. Will probably come after me, and therefore I need to ensure that they're not going to be able to come after me. They won't be able to come after my business, so they won't be able to seize my property from my family, and have all my children out on the street. So I've got to make sure of that, and he will probably, I'm not saying probably, but there's a good likelihood that he's going to issue a preemptive pardon, maybe to himself, to his family, his friends and allies. They probably will go after Bannon again. They'll probably go after Peter Navarro again, or any of the people around Trump will be vulnerable after he leaves office. So that's why I don't think Trump is gonna mess with that. I think that the preemptive pardons are now here to stay. Now that lawfare is here to stay. I mean, if we can say, okay, well, lawfare is gone, and we won't have presidents going after their predecessors, that would be one thing. But I think that's now enshrined within U.S. governmental practice, which is presidents will go after their predecessors, because it happens in many countries. You can, so many countries that's exactly what you do. the last man in. He's now a private citizen. He doesn't have any power. I, who am chancellor or prime minister or president, I do have the power, and I can actually make life really, really miserable for him. Um, so yes, I think that the presidents will want to maintain the preemptive pardon power. Because they have to think about their own future. Um, but anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Yeah, but there are people. I mean, what you said, Cynthia, is interesting because I heard today that there were people urging Trump not to accept that. In other words, they're saying that he can just ignore this. He doesn't have to do anything. Doesn't have to act in any way to respect the this preemptive pardon. So that was. I can't remember who said it. It was one of these conservative legal analysts who was saying that Trump can just simply ignore that. I don't think he will, and I'm not sure it's such a great idea to do it. But I think there will be people telling Trump, just ignore it. Just say no. I don't accept that there's a preemptive pardon. I think the DOJ can indeed go after the Biden family, and then let the Supreme Court decide whether that preemptive pardon has any legal validity. Anyway, where are we? Go back. Okay, so Dr. Nostran, Dr. Van Nostrand says, George, it's the 14th Amendment. Regardless, family reunification can be greatly restricted without arguing about the 14th Amendment. The relevant part of the amendment reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Yeah, I know that, but nonetheless, look, I think family reunification, I think that's a really bad idea. Again, that's a complete abuse of immigration laws and a huge burden on the U.S. government because of, as through family reunification, you get all sorts of. I mean, and I know this from people. Always coming across this in New York. People. Because of family reunification, they were able to bring in their elderly parents, and and now there's elderly parents were able to make full use of the American healthcare system. So that's nice. They come from a country where doesn't have the best healthcare system. Now they're able to use to the full the American healthcare system without ever having contributed anything to the American healthcare system. So it was always a total abuse of the immigration law, with this family reunification. But nonetheless, I think if you read the words there, that Fourth Amendment, it says it doesn't say all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. And yet they could have said that. The drafters of the 14th Amendment could have said that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside, which is what people claim the 14th Amendment says. But when you read it, that's not what the 14th Amendment says. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. They put that in. They put that clause in, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. There had to have a reason. There had to have been a reason why they put that clause in. And the clause in, obviously, if you're here illegally, then you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, because the United States doesn't know about your existence. So you can't be under the jurisdiction of the United States if it doesn't know about your existence. Because if it did know about your existence, then it would seek to remove you. And so that's why. And again, if you're here temporarily, on a tourist visa, you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. You're here, on a short visit, but you're subject to the jurisdiction of your home state. So I think that's what the 14th Amendment says. But we'll see what the Supreme Court rules. I think it's going to be a very close one. I'm not sure how the vote's going to go, but it's going to be 5-4 one way or the other as to the meaning of the 14th Amendment. But I think it's good. I think Trump did this. I think he knew that it's going to be challenged, and it's going to be a long process, wending its way through the courts, but it will end up eventually on the Supreme Court docket, and it's a good thing that finally the Supreme Court will rule on this matter. So anyway, Dr. Nostra says, so for example, children born to diplomats do not receive U.S. citizenship. Yeah, that's right. Nobody's going to successfully claim that anchor babies, especially those who are old enough to be subject to juvenile laws, are not subject to state or federal law. Well, no, but I mean, if they were, if they were here illegally, if the parents were there illegally, then they're still not they would say they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States because their citizenship is of another country. I mean, that's the meaning of this of that statement, not subject to the jurisdiction. So that's why they're not entitled to enjoy citizenship. The citizenship is from their mother. The mother is, if she came from whatever country, Honduras, then your citizenship is Honduras. Your mother was a citizen of Honduras. You are therefore a citizen of Honduras. So no, absolutely, you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So that's always self-evident. If you're a child, your citizenship is the citizenship of your mother. Or your father, but your citizenship is that of your parents. It's not where you happen to have been born. Anyway, Carlos says, I think the Gulf of Mexico has a better ring to it, but I'm a Mexican. Maybe I'm biased. I can see that point. Gulf of Mexico has, I agree. It has there's a little exotic quality to it. On the other hand, I don't have a problem. I mean, the Americans can rename it. They can call it the Gulf of America, and the Mexicans can call it the Gulf of Mexico. That's fine. It says, Dr. Nostrum says, historically, the U.S. created Panama, the country, by carving it off from a currently adjacent country. Yeah, that's all true. Nonetheless, history is what it is. You can't sort of go all the way back. Well, who did this and what? The Panama Canal was built by the United States, and the United States controlled it for many years, and then he decided arbitrarily, didn't have to do it. It was the United States decided it, not because Panama, made any claim that the United States needed to respect, but the United States decided to give control of the canal to Panama. That's very nice. I mean, that's fine. I mean, I supported Jimmy Carter when he did that, but you also had to appreciate that at some point the United States might change its mind. I mean, that's always your problem. That you have to take into consideration that the United States will change its mind. In which case, if you are a small country, and that applies to Ukraine, though that Ukraine wasn't very small, but it applies to the Baltic states, it applies to all small countries, don't piss off your big neighbor. Because at some point, your big neighbor is going to get fed up with it, and it will just simply exert itself and say, you know what, I kind of think that we want a canal back. Just like at some point, the Russians are going to turn around to the Baltic states. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next year, but they're going to say, you haven't really been very nice to us. You haven't treated our nationals, the Russian citizens, very well. We've warned you about this, I don't know how many times, that we're unhappy about the way you treat our nationals. You've aligned yourself with a hostile military alliance. They're obviously a danger and a threat to us. We're kind of taking your countries over. Now, that's a high-risk strategy because that could lead you to a war with NATO, but it would also be a perfectly reasonable position to take. Say, we gave you independence, we accepted your independence. We sort of expected, maybe in a half-hearted sort of way, that you will respect our interests, you will express some gratitude for our generosity in giving you independence when we didn't have to do it. You haven't done it. Instead, you have jeopardized our security. Um, we're just taking it back. We're bringing you back into, into our orbit. Again, as I say, I don't think it's going to happen, but it's something that could happen. So I don't think Panama has done everything that it should have done to keep the United States happy. It had assumed that all U.S. presidents will be like Jimmy Carter, and they'll be very generous and so on. But that's not the way history is. You sometimes get a Donald Trump in as president, and then those generous gifts that you got from the Americans, they suddenly are called into question. Anyway. Dr. Nostrum says Mexico can, of course, continue to calling the Gulf of Mexico. I agree. For that matter, given normative U.S. behavior, a lot of people in the U.S. will just keep calling it the Gulf of Mexico out of habit, if nothing else. Yeah, I think so. And then Dr. Nostrum says Russia was the only European country to side with the Union during the U.S. Civil War. True enough. And given British imperial expansion, selling Alaska, which at the time was a burden on Russia, made economic and strategic sense for Russia. No, I think what you're saying is right. However, you have to think in the long term, and in the long term, the United States could well become an adversary of Russia. This was something that was obvious to Alexis de Tocqueville many years earlier. He predicted that the dominant powers of the next 100 years would be the United States and the Russian Empire. So that's something you have to think about. You don't want to get yourself into a position of vulnerability to the United States. And it's clear that while it's true that generally until until the Bolshevik revolutions, relations between the United States and Russia were pretty good. There were no wars between America and Russia. Then things changed after this Bolshevik seizure of power, and then of course we had the Cold War, and then relations really were bad. But now relations are bad again. So clearly, this is now something we have to think about as more or less a permanent state of affairs, that the United States and Russia are serious adversaries, as kind of foreseen by Alexis de Tocqueville. So if Alexis de Tocqueville saw this a long time before 1867, when Alaska was sold, then the Russians should have thought a little bit more carefully about selling it. Anyway. Danaki says, well, like that Bushite said, Karl Rove, maybe we're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating the other new realities which you can study too. That doesn't sound like Karl Rove. It's more like one of those more aggressive neocons. My view is that as long as Trump is only concerning himself with United States, U.S. power in the hemisphere, U.S. Energy production, U.S. Strategic interest in Greenland, with Panama, making sure that the transit between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans is as smooth as possible. I think that's I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem when the United States takes the whole world as its own backyard and decides that every single problem in every single country is a matter of existential urgency for the United States, and that the United States needs to get involved in the internal affairs of every other country, and that every other country must be continually punished by the United States, whether through sanctions or terrorism or even worse, bombing campaigns. I think that's the problem. When you have all the talks about a rules-based order, run by the United States, and that everybody has to succumb and do as they're told according to the rules-based order in which the United States get to set the rules. And when the United States says that the world is divided between democracies and autocracies, liberal states and anti-liberal states and illiberal states, that I think is the problem. That's a messianic worldview. That's an ideological worldview. That's a Manichaean worldview. That's the one that's the dangerous one. And I think, in the past, that's how American leaders have been thinking. And that, I think, is catastrophic. If you're just thinking in that old-fashioned imperialist way, hey, how can we get this waterway? How can we get this piece of territory? How can we get ourselves as rich as possible? How can we exploit these resources as much as possible? Then I think that's relatively harmless. And, I can sign on to that. And I think an American president who wants to increase the territorial reach of the United States, said, okay, well, that's kind of what you're supposed to do. You're president of the United States. As long as you don't go down that path of the rules-based order and you don't try and start trying to overthrow governments, then that's okay. Now, Trump may well do that. Trump may also do a variation of his rules-based order, and he may well go down the path of trying to overthrow Maduro and all sorts of governments that he doesn't like. If he does, then I think his administration will end in disaster, and he will have failed, just like he failed during his first term. Maybe if he does that, if he just focuses on the kind of the policy of kind of old-fashioned imperialism. I'm not saying it's a great. I'm not defending that. I'm not saying this is what you should do. But if it better doing that than what Biden and Blinken did. I think that's the worst. What Biden, Blinken, Obama, Bush did, and of course before them Bill Clinton, what they did was really terrible. Anne-Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. I was really interested in what you said about Wagner, because on the Gaggle Music Club, we posted Wagner's Wesendonck Lieder, and Anne-Marie rightly pointed out that opinion on Wagner are very divided. Either people love him or people hate him, and I think that's absolutely right. The problem that I said, in response to Anne-Marie's comment, was that the people always start thinking about politics when it comes to Wagner, and I think that's really unfair, because Wagner was primarily, one of the greatest artists in Western civilization, and his interests were primarily not political. I mean, his interests were love, the redemption through love. His interests were Christianity, and sin and forgiveness. These were his themes. But the politics was attributed to Wagner because everybody now knows that Wagner was Hitler's favorite composer. I'm not even sure he was his favorite composer, but let's say he was Hitler's favorite composer, and so somehow the taint of Hitler attaches to Wagner, and I think that's really unfair. So, for instance, Wagner is not played in Israel. You cannot play Wagner in Israel. That says something about Israel and Israeli society, that he takes this very narrow-minded, ignorant, envious view of the world, that he doesn't play, again, one of the greatest composers ever. Daniel Barenboim went to Israel, and he played the Liebestod from Tristan und Isolde in Israel, and that created a huge uproar. And how dare Barenboim break the taboo in Israel over Wagner? But given the stature of Barenboim, he got away with it. Anybody else, they would absolutely not get away with it in Israel if you tried to play Wagner. It just, I think, but people always forget that Wagner himself was politically quite radical. I mean, he was a sort of figure who had been a revolutionary in 1848, and he had to flee Germany. He lived in Switzerland, where Anne Marie lives, and he lived in Italy. But most of the time he spent in Switzerland. He was couldn't return to Germany until the 1860s. So about 1862, it was about, I don't know, 12 or so years that he was, he was he couldn't live in Germany. So again, that the picture of Wagner as a sort of this this arch reactionary and so on is inappropriate. Now, Wagner was anti-Semitic. There's no question about that. He had a whole theory about it as to why composers who were Jews were really bad and that their music wasn't very good. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to accept his arguments, but nonetheless, like he at least presented an argument as to why he didn't like the music of Mendelssohn and Meyerbeer and why he thought Jews were not, Jews couldn't be great composers. But again, it wasn't unusual for people in the middle of the 19th century to hold very negative views about the Jews. It's more than 150 years ago. You can't really take views people said then and talk about now. But anyway, I urge everybody, first of all, to listen to Wagner's Wesendonck-Lieder and then read Anne-Marie's very interesting observations about it and about the performance of the Wesendonck-Lieder. So thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And then Danaki says, I find it funny when I hear talk of corruption in Syria or wherever, where Shoigu, the former Russian defense minister, Shoigu fleeced the MOD budget of at least 11 trillion rubles. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's always hilarious, there's this corruption. And again, the Russian government officials talked about corruption. I think even Putin, I can't be sure, but I think even Putin referred to corruption in Syria. And you say, you're talking about corruption. I mean, everything that went on in the Russian military, and it's not just Shoigu. I mean, there were just so many of these Russian government officials who were working in the Ministry of Defense who were absolutely stealing Russia blind. I mean, they were just selling the stuff off on the black market and living high on the hog. And this is something the Russians themselves admitted. I mean, they arrested some character. We did a whole podcast on it. And some guy, just his wife, was shopping in Paris. All the most expensive boutiques in Paris. They had a nice place where they spent their summers in Monte Carlo. This is all Russian taxpayer money. They were living, spending their summers in Monte Carlo at Russian taxpayer expense. I mean, it's just shameful. And you're absolutely right, Danaki. You talk about Syrian corruption. They stole all this money, and then lo and behold, the Russian military wasn't prepared. They didn't have the equipment, that they needed. They didn't none of the the stuff that they needed had somehow gone up in a where did it go? Well, ask the people who are living in Monte Carlo where it all went. Dr. Nostrum says, drill, baby, drill is more of a political slogan than a viable industrial policy. Petrochemical companies are themselves quite aware of both depletion problems and production delays. Well, I don't know. I mean, you can absolutely increase production as the Reagan administration did during the 1980s. I mean, I agree with you that there does come to a point when if you produce so much and the price drops, there comes a point when it's simply no longer making economic sense to go on producing because whatever you're earning, your earnings cannot be used to invest in the industry. I mean, you have to make it economically viable to go on producing. And if basically the price keeps dropping, then essentially you're not earning enough to go on investing in the industry and to continue with the production. And that's why ultimately oil producers cut back on production because it no longer makes economic sense for them to go on producing. So I think that's going to come about. But there's no question. I don't doubt for 1 minute that Trump is going to absolutely increase production, and for some time, world prices are going to drop. Then I think then something will have to be done to cut back on production because it's just not economically viable to go on producing when the prices are so low. But for a time, I think it will have a significant effect. I think it will have an effect on the Russian economy. The golden age, Dr. Marshall says, the golden age is pretty much standard U.S. political braggadocio. Well, yes and no. Obama's shtick was not to praise the United States. On the contrary, he was kind of his shtick was to be ashamed of the United States. He went on an apology tour early on in his administration. He went to the Middle East and then said, "Oh, we did a mea culpa. We've been so mean about the Muslims." This was kind of in reaction to George W. Bush. And so that it wasn't braggadocio what Obama was doing. Now, in a way, they talk about values, America's values, and so on. But the problem when you talk about values is that they don't really have any connection with a particular country. They just simply got values. They're just out there, like a chandelier hanging there, something called values. If you want to talk about America, then you have to talk about something very specific, the specific entity. What exactly is America? And of course, when you do talk about an entity called America, then it's not about values. It's about, as Trump said, and I think that's why it was quite a good speech, the inauguration speech, because he talks about this is, a country of pioneers, of adventurers, of men who conquered the wilderness, men who built the railways, built the skyscrapers. They sent a man to the moon. This is what America is. That doesn't have anything about values. It's about what this entity, this cultural, civilizational, national entity that Americans can feel proud of. Now, with Biden and Blinken and George W. Bush as well, they more or less talked about values. Oh, well, America's, it's about these values. But the values are themselves just, ethereal. They don't really have any connection with America. Just, America arrogates to itself, oh, freedom, democracy, equality, against Islamophobia, against anti-Semitism. They don't have any connection with America. So I think it's a different thing. And that's why Obama said, oh, yeah, this America's values. And the values are that we are now against racism. So our history is tainted by racism, but now we're against racism. And so, yeah, we had all these terrible things in our past, but now we're good. Now we stand for good precisely because we had all these bad things in the past. And then Trump, doesn't want to do that. I mean, he's saying somehow, well, we are a great country, and he doesn't want to engage in, the bad things that's in the past. So I think it's a different thing. It's not the braggadocio. What Obama was doing was not braggadocio. I mean, I think on the contrary, he just said, yeah, values, but that's because we've overcome these terrible things in the past. And then, of course, Obama changed his mind and said, no, we haven't overcome anything in our past. Our past is still our present. We're still racist. We're still institutionalized racism. We're still Islamophobic. And so, that's the conclusion of of Obama. And that was also the view of Biden. So, yes, we have this the leader of this this world of this democracy-loving states as opposed to the authoritarian state. But at the same time, here we have half of our country are all racist. Half of our country are anti-Semitic. Half of our country are election deniers. Half of our countries are vaccine deniers. Half of our countries believes in white nationalism. So I don't see, it's a very different way of looking at America. What Trump did, and then what that inauguration speech, which I think was Trump's best speech, ever since the one that he delivered on July the 4th, 2020, when the one he did at Mount Rushmore speech. I mean, he tried to define what America is, why Americans should love their country, rather than what Biden and Obama did, which is somehow why Americans should feel ashamed of their country and embrace some nebulous values. Well, that's what your country is, these values, but a country is not values. A country is a country. I think Trump wanted to make that point. Anyway, Marx 2023 says Trump is owned by the Zionists. I'm not sure about that. I mean, you may be right, but we'll see about that. He was owned by the Zionists back during his first term. He needed their money, and I think all the Adelson and all the rest of them, and he really was owned by the Zionists. I don't know if that's going to be the case now. It may be. I don't want to make a prediction and say, oh no, he's going to do this and this and so on, because it may be that he will indeed pursue an Israel first agenda. I mean, there are people in his circle who do believe in Israel first. On the other hand, Trump may well just decide he doesn't want to go down that path. He says, hey, I am the president, and you have to go back to why did he send out that truth with Jeffrey Sachs, essentially talking about this demon Netanyahu. That was as that was as damning of Netanyahu as you can be. And but Trump sent it out, so that doesn't sound like someone who is that well disposed towards Netanyahu. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, that's why I don't want to say he is owned by the Zionists. I don't want to say he's not owned by the Zionists. But I think at this stage, we're gonna have to see how things develop. Clearly, to get this deal done, he applied pressure on Netanyahu. We'll see whether he continues with that pressure. And then Nostrum says Trump is too mercenary to be owned by the Zionists. Yeah, I agree. As for Israel, it is the tail wagged by the U.S. dog, not the other way around. Yeah. And then NKMRD says the U.S. has always been the country of vision, of projection. Many people there, they can create realities by believing in those realities. I think that's a sort of cool, not a very popular approach in Central Europe, apart from some Davos maniacs. Well, I think, as I say, I mean, I think if you get away from the idea that America is about values, then we can get into a serious conversation, and then every country can start feeling that they have something unique to contribute, that they have a distinct culture and civilization. Russia has a distinct culture and civilization. What Russianness means, say what Americanness means. But when you start talking about values, then there's this, everyone is judged by these nebulous terms, which nobody really even knows what they are, but somehow you're all judged. Either you're embracing these values or you're rejecting these values. And that's how you just decide whether this is a good country or a bad country. And I think that's a truly poisonous thing. Anyway. And then again, Mark says, don't be fooled. Trump is owned by and surrounded by Zionists, not just in politics, it's business. This ceasefire is just a ploy before the final assault, as lots of money be made next we'll see. Well, we'll see. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, we don't really know. Anyway, Marx says Trump's first mistake was to end the political retribution, just as he made the same mistakes with Hillary to Lahore. Well, I think that was the case, but the Democrats didn't really play by the same rules, and so he went along with that traditional succession of power. That, well, you don't go after your predecessor, you don't go after your political adversaries, and that's how we can enjoy our democracy, and we can have a peaceful transfer of power. But the Democrats changed all that. I think they launched this campaign to destroy Trump, and to put him behind bars. Once that genie is out of the bottle, then every president has to worry that the moment he he ceases to be the president, the moment on noon of January the 20th, he suddenly ceases to be the president. He's now a private citizen. He has to worry that his successor is going to come after him. So that's why I think it doesn't make sense now to get away from preemptive pardons. And then Judy comes back and says, oh, where are we? Yeah, Judy says, Matthew Perner accepted a plea deal that would have meant a sentence of a few months. He lost his standing with the January 6th community by accepting a deal. Then the DOJ slapped on a terrorism enhancement, and he was to go to prison for 7 years. It was all too much for him. Yeah, no, I think that's right. 7 years, that's a serious business. I mean, that you don't want. It's it's not an easy thing to survive 7 years in prison. Many people can't survive it. Yeah, I mean, at all times, I mean, accepting a plea deal, I think is a perfectly reasonable strategy. I mean, if you're up before a DC jury, your lawyer is telling you, look, you have no hope of an acquittal. It's not going to happen. They're not going to acquit you. You go through a trial, you're going to lose that trial. It's 100% guaranteed you will lose the trial, and then you're looking at I don't know, several years in prison. So take the deal. And I think it's a very, very, very sensible thing to do, to take the deal when you have no serious hope of acquittal. And there have been no acquittals. I mean, everyone's been convicted. So I don't think there's any shame in taking a plea deal. I mean, so this guilty plea means absolutely nothing. I mean, all this CNN is talking about, it's a guilty plea. They pleaded guilty. Well, of course they pleaded guilty. It's the perfectly rational thing to do. And then, as Judy points out, yeah, but then the DOJ slapped on these terrorism enhancements. So even though he took the plea deal, he was now looking at 7 years. And yeah, no, there's no question. 7 years. That's a really serious crime. And basically, you have no hope of getting out. I mean, other than maybe Trump will get back into power, and then maybe he will pardon me. Yeah, maybe, maybe not. It's a hell of a risk to take. So one can see the pressure that somebody could come under and leading to suicide. So anyway, thank you, Judy. Anne Marie says, I was quite astonished at the inauguration. The first sermon was actually held by a rabbi. Yeah, I noticed that. Has this ever happened before? I don't know, but I did notice that the service in a country, it's a Christian country. It's in a Christian country. The first service was held by a rabbi. But it was the evangelical preacher. He was the one who brought the house down. I mean, he was a very fiery preacher. I liked him. But I don't know why they get in a primarily Christian country where the Jews are about 2% of the population. It is very strange that the first service is by a rabbi. There we go. Okay, let's go back. Okay. Sorry, it's a little hard to read this. And Mark says, I just read the Russian budget rose to a record level in December of 28% the previous year, according to Bloomberg. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think it's, yeah. All right. I think I'm way past the the time. I thought maybe did I miss? I thought I missed something. Oh yeah, Judy. Yeah. So I can see it on the um, I can say so. Judah says Joseph Joachim, the violinist composer who was in the inner circle of Schumann and Brahms as a teenager, later drifted into the Liszt Wagner circles. Then in 1857, Joachim um, abruptly denounced his new friends, some say based on the Jewish question. But what Joachim said himself was they were profaning the sacred forms of music. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Joseph Joachim, the violinist composer, was in that show. Okay, so okay, wait. So I assume he was what he was Jewish. Later drifted Liszt Wagner. Then in 18, he abruptly denounced his new friends. Some say based on the Jewish question, but what Joachim said himself was they were profaning um, the sacred forms of music. Huh. I know that's I'm gonna have to look that up, but now I've lost. I don't know. There seems something happened here, but that's very interesting what you said, Judy. Let me look this up and come back to you on that because I don't know much about that, and so I don't want to say anything because I might just get it wrong. So let me look up about Joseph Joachim. That sounds very interesting, and then I'll get back to you. Thank you, Judy. That was a really interesting contribution. I mean, I want to learn about that, and thank you, Judy, as always, for your generosity. It looks like something untoward has happened, so I might as well just bring this thing to an end. Thank you, everybody who joined me. Thank you for all of your comments. Thank you for all of the questions, and above all, for your contributions to the. Yeah, Anne Marie says, have to have a look into this. Me too. I've got to look into this. I'm really interested now. Thank you all. Thank you for being here. We will be back, or I will be back on Thursday, same time. Look forward to seeing you then. Until then, good night. Bye bye.